my oncologist, like no one ever even mentioned clinical trials to me. So like what is the criteria for a doctor typically to actually tell a patient about them and inform them that, hey, this could be an option for you?
That's a really great question. So the main thing, and I can only speak for the United Kingdom, which is my area of practice, but the main thing for somebody to recruit you means that they, or somebody to even speak to you about clinical trials, they have to be aware of it. I mean, that applies globally, but here in the UK, generally speaking, what tends to happen is that people will only be aware of trials that are happening in their hospital, in their unit. And
Oh,
you know as much as I do that there's a huge number of hospitals in any given region, and whether or not they'll be running a particular trial is, you might not know that when you go there. Um, and the reason why I stress the United Kingdom is that I know that here we have these places called, sponsored sites, places that are approved to run a trial.
okay.
And if your hospital isn't one, chances are is they won't be able to, they probably, well, they certainly can't sign you up to the trial, but they probably won't be able to, they probably won't even know about it, because many clinicians aren't aware of a trial that's running next door. Maybe even in a, within a different department of the same hospital, because there are so many of them going on, you will only know about the ones that you're directly involved with on the whole. And of course, there are very, very switched on individuals who are very connected, they know what's going on all around the place, and they'll link you up. And if you've got somebody like that, that's fantastic.
Right.
You've got, you've done really well. But I think overall, it's not a given. And there is a huge drive, and there has been a huge drive in my hospital, for example, to empower patients. And we had a campaign called "It's Okay to Ask" about clinical research,
Hmm.
encouraging patients to see, asking, are there any trials for me that will work? But you'll one of the big problems is that you've got you know trials are very specific. You have to ask very focused questions for them to work well. The kinds of questions we ask is, in patients with a specific gene mutation and this particular subtype of cancer in this stage of the disease who are that age, and so on and so forth, is drug X a good idea? And a good idea will usually be defined very narrowly as well. And so you can quickly see that, you know, it takes a lot of work to find somebody who fits all of those criteria. And that's why maybe you don't get approached for trials, because the person doing it has a trial that, you might be right for 7 out of the 10 criteria, but the other 3 you don't match. And then that trial probably won't be the one you get invited to join. Which is
Gosh.
again why I think ancora.ai is such an important tool, because it takes a lot of that legwork out of
Right.
things for you, and you can hold a huge database. But I'm sure we'll get
Experience. Like,
back to that later.
what is the percentage of cancer patients who actually show an interest in clinical trials without, like, you having to tell them about it? Like, what is it, a lot, a little? What's your experience?
Well, it's funny you should ask. But my exposure, I'm in the process of setting up a trial, but so far I've not had a huge amount of cancer-specific patients asking me about clinical trials. But it is something that patients will ask you about in all avenues of life, and um, in all avenues of disease, frankly. So
Mhm.
we've had trials here in my center which were about spinal surgery, and people do ask you in any number of consultations, whether there are trials going. Um, but to be honest, probably fewer than you'd think. And I think that maybe is because in my surgical work, I've not been involved. I've not been seeing too many patients with brain cancer yet. Um, and I think that one of the reasons I've not seen it that often is because I think a lot of people associate clinical trials mostly with cancer, when actually there are myriad trials out there for patients who don't have cancer, patients who have any number of other diseases, head injuries, spinal, degenerative disease, you name it. There's just about anything gets researched with clinical trials. And um, I think that's one of the really interesting things is when you talked about clinical trials, of course, most of our minds go to cancer, but actually there are so many clinical trials out there, and anybody should ask about it, not just cancer patients.
It's a really good point. I tend to forget that there are other illnesses or injuries that need to be studied and hopefully find better treatment for it and outside of the cancer space. So that's actually a really good reminder for other patients or people in general outside of the cancer space to know, hey, that is an option.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I mean, the cancer space has been leading the charge for so long. So again, it's really understandable. It's the quality of the studies that come out of there, and the number, and it's an amazing space to work in, for people who are doing research, and that produces amazing results for patients.